Hi everybody! So you're either watching this video in the content area, or you may be encountering this video embedded within a quiz that maybe you've already taken or an activity in the course. But regardless of where you're seeing this video in the course, what it's going to cover are just some basic writing skills, some basic moves that you're going to need for your academic summary, which is called essay number 1, earning your response. And so you've already seen the assignment sheet for this essay. Here it is. And most of these criteria are things that you're just going to get to practice when you're drafting your essay, and then I will give you comments. You'll get feedback from me, you'll get feedback from your peers, so you'll know how to sort of improve your draft as you go. But there are definitely a couple of things in here that I think it would be helpful for me to provide you with some upfront guidance on before you even get into the drafting stage. And so some just technical things like how to use what we call author tags, and maybe how to integrate quotations and somebody else's material into your academic summary. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. And the first move or skill that I want to talk about is using something called author tags or attributive tags. And I like to use the phrase author tags. It's just how I learned it, but I know that other teachers, maybe you had an English teacher who used attributive tags. And all that these are places in the essay where you're using language to let your reader know that you are using somebody else's words and ideas, that the ideas on the page are not your ideas, but that you're representing what somebody else wrote. And so you've probably read things where you've seen other writers using these author tags, so something like according to Dweck, or Dweck states, or Dweck claims. And so it's important that we use these author tags because we want to make sure to give credit where credit is due. So Carol Dweck, this is her. Hopefully you've already had a chance to watch her talk on growth mindsets. And you want to make sure that we're letting our reader know that these are not our words necessarily. These are not our ideas. These are just something that we're borrowing from another author. And so author tags are one great way to do that. So what I've done is pulled up a summary here from a student in one of our previous iterations of this class, and I've highlighted all of the author tags that she uses throughout the essay. And I've done that so you can see how frequently she is attributing the ideas in her own summary. And so everywhere that you see Carol Dweck's name come up, that's where this particular writer, Rebecca, is letting us know these are not my ideas, these are Dweck's ideas. And notice that she uses author tags both when she's quoting Dweck, as in right here, but also when she's just borrowing ideas that are not necessarily word for word. So it's important to credit that information, whether it's coming in the form of a quotation or whether you're just representing those words, those ideas in your own words. Both of those things need to be tagged. And so in an academic summary, it's really easy for if you become kind of lax in how you use your author tags, it starts to sound like you're talking about ideas that were yours. And your reader starts to it blurs the line in terms of, okay, are we still talking about Dweck? Or is this now the writer throwing in his or her ideas? So it's important to keep hitting the writer with those author tags throughout. Sometimes students will say, this is so repetitive, it's kind of driving me crazy. And that's why I would encourage you to maybe consider changing up the verbs that you use. You don't just have to say like Dweck says over and over again, because yeah, that's going to start to sound really boring. So look at what Rebecca does. She's using all different kinds of verbs. So Dweck compares, Dweck focuses on, Dweck believes, Dweck explains, Dweck excitedly announces. And so she really gets creative with how she's using those tags, and it doesn't at all feel tedious when you're reading it. Now, another thing you can do, if you feel like you are getting repetitive and you don't want to just rely on those kind of right in the sentence author tags, you could use something called a parenthetical citation. I'm sure you're familiar with this from high school English. This is where we just credit the author for their words or ideas, words and or ideas at the end of the sentence. And so if you look at this sentence right here, it says, real learning, however, is achieved when a difficult problem is thoughtfully processed through and corrected via many trials and creative solutions to reach a certain outcome. So this is Rebecca putting that idea in her own words, but it's not her idea to begin with. She's taking what Dweck said and just kind of restating it in her own words. So it's still important for her to give Dweck credit for that. So how she does that is by putting Dweck in parentheses at the end of that sentence. She could have just as easily said, according to Dweck, comma, real learning, and then if she did that, she wouldn't need to have the parenthetical. So you only have to have one or the other. It's completely up to you. It's a stylistic choice. And so I think that author tags read pretty nicely, but I think it's fine if you want to alternate them with a few parenthetical citations along the way. Now, if you have done APA or MLA citation before, you might look at this citation and say, that looks a little skimpy. You've only got the author's last name here. So what you're probably thinking of in that case is that you've probably cited sources before using MLA, in which case you would also include the page number of the source, or you may have cited things in APA, in which case you would have included the date for the source. Now, the reason we don't have the date or the page number here is because we're using a video that Dweck produced. So there are no page numbers. And even though there is a date, we don't need to include it because in this class, it's an English class, we're using MLA, which stands for Modern Language Association. So here's MLA, Modern Language Association. This is what all of your English classes, your composition classes, literature classes are going to use, MLA style. And MLA adheres to author page format. So if we were citing, let's say, a book, this is a book that Carol Dweck wrote. It's called Mindset. It's a fantastic book if you ever want to read it. Let's say we weren't citing her talk online. We were citing her book. Then we would pull whatever it is, idea or quote from the book that we want to use. And at the end of the sentence, we would put in parentheses her last name followed by the page number. You don't need to do anything like this or this. I'm sorry, that it's really as straightforward as just listing the last name and the page number. And so the reason for this is because scholars in the fields of literature and writing, we want to know where you found the material you're using because we might want to go back and find that original source for ourselves. So let's say you're quoting something from Shakespeare and I'm an English teacher. I may want to go back and get the whole, maybe you're just quoting a little piece of a poem or something. I may want to go back and get the whole thing. So I may want to go see it. So we want to find the sources that you used, which is why you include the last name and the page number. Now this is very different when you're using APA citation, which you may have some experience with as well. So if you've taken like a psych class or a nursing class or something in the medical fields, possibly in the sciences, you're probably going to use something called APA, American Psychological Association. And the difference is that rather than having the author and the page number, you have the author and the date. So if I were citing an APA, and I was going to cite this book, I would put Dweck and then I would put 2006 because that is when she actually wrote this book. So why the difference? Why? I mean, it almost seems like academics are just trying to make this confusing and hard for students, but they're not. The reason why people in this field are concerned with the date is because this is mostly a medical field, and so it's really important to figure out the currency of the sources that are being used. So if I'm doing some research on something like Alzheimer's or I'm doing a psychological study, I don't necessarily want to be using sources from the 1980s. Possibly, but more likely I should be using sources that are current, the most current research in the medical field. And so these folks want to know if your sources are current. And so that's why, if you've ever wondered, why MLA has that author page format and why APA has the author date format. So again, we are going to be using author page format in this class. And since we don't actually know what page anything's on, we don't have a page because it's a video, you're just going to need to put Dweck in parentheses if you want to cite it that way. Okay, moving on. A couple of other skills that I just want to quickly review has to do with integrating quotation marks or integrating quotations into your actual summary. And so for the most part, I'd say 95% of your summary is going to be paraphrased in your own words. So you're going to be demonstrating that you understood and that you can articulate what it was that was in Dweck's message. But it's generally a good idea to include a couple of quotes somewhere in the summary so that you can give your reader just a taste of what Dweck's voice was like, or if Dweck said something particularly powerful in a way that you feel like you can't really capture it any better, you might want to use a quote for something like that. And so if we look back to our sample, you'll see that this student, Rebecca, has a couple of quotes in her essay. I've highlighted them. And let's just look at how she integrates these. So in the start of her second paragraph, she says, Dweck believes that a fixed mindset hinders learning with the assumption that, and here's where the quote part comes in, talents and abilities are just these fixed traits. They, who have a fixed mindset, believe that we have a certain amount of, and that's it. So the reason why we're calling this a quote is because this is the direct, exact language that Dweck used, word for word, okay? So you want to put those quotation marks around it to let the reader know that these are not your words. You're taking her words. And so you also want to make sure that you include a period at the end of the sentence and that that period is captured in the quotation marks, okay? So this is kind of what you would call a paraquote, because what Rebecca's doing is she's paraphrasing in the first half and then she moves into a quote in the second half of her sentence, and that's perfectly fine. So she does a really nice job of integrating the quote here. She does not need to have the parenthetical citation, which we just talked about like that, because she's already got an author tag in the beginning here. And so since she has that author tag, she doesn't need to worry about a citation. So that's pretty much how you're going to integrate a quote. Sometimes you're going to run into a situation where you need to manipulate a quote a little bit, because let's just say that it doesn't fit with the rest of your sentence structure, or grammatically the section that you want to take is just awkward when you pull it from one context and put it into another. So you have a couple of tools that you can use as a writer to make that quote work for you. And you can see that Rebecca's using one of those tools here. It's called brackets. And so she has used this little tool, these brackets, to include words that were not originally in the quote. And so the words that she included here were who have a fixed mindset. And the reason she did that is because when she pulled this quote out, the they became ambiguous. Her reader no longer understands what they refers to. And so she's putting that in there as a clarification. Sometimes people will use that tool as well if they're needing to change like the verb tense of something. We have a certain amount of it, and that's it. Let's see if I can give you an example. Let's say that the original quote was become afraid, and you need to change it for some reason to are becoming afraid. I realize this sentence is not a quote, but that's how you would do it. If this was part of a quote and you needed to make some grammatical changes so that it fit with your sentences, you could use brackets to indicate to your reader, this isn't exactly how the original quote looks like, so I'm letting you know where I'm making changes. It's important that you make just small, subtle changes because you don't want to change the actual meaning of the person's quote. You want to capture what it actually meant, but you can make these adjustments so that it flows better with your essay. The other thing you can do is, let's say you only want to take a part of a quote, and there's a bunch that you want to cut out. Well, you can cut it out. Changes. Let's say you wanted to shorten it. Then you might just say things and then put in ... And that lets your reader know there were more words in there originally, but you don't need those words. Let's say you just want the first half of the sentence and then something that comes way down at the bottom. You don't need to include all those other words just because you want to get to those two pieces. You can leave those other words out and include those 3 ellipses, and that'll let your reader know that something's missing there. So that is how you would use brackets, and that is how you use ellipses to change the quotes. And I think as far as Essay 1 goes, that's it in terms of the moves that you need to make with citing your sources. So if you run into any specific questions while you're drafting, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you with that.